podcast is brought to you by Fireside.fm. Podcast hosting by podcasters for podcasters. Now on to the episode.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah. I know pre-show we were, there's always a lot going on in AI world, but sometimes it's hard to decide what to talk about.
Yeah, I don't want to bore people with the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah. And like we kind of touched on last time at the top was, we're not the podcast that's going to give you all the news updates all the time. But one thing that you and I have been talking about a lot, even just pre-show, but off and on as well, is like, how can we, show people what we do, but make it interesting? Because like we actually, this is a little bit of an inside knowledge that we never released a few episodes back the last time not the last time, but when we originally started, we had, I think, 3 episodes that went out. We tried, I think, 2 episodes where we actually like screen shared and whatnot and recorded quite a bit, but never decided to release those because they just never felt right. Now, I don't know if we figured it out yet, but I think we've got, a couple things that maybe we can talk about here and just kind of show some of the stuff that we do. But, before we even jump into that, I wanted to touch on the thing that you and I were just talking about pre-show, which was Claude Cowork. And we've both been using it. I think I've been kind of moving away from it a little bit. I still use it for some things. And I've run into some issues myself recently, and it sounds like maybe you've run into some of the same ones. So why don't you kind of talk about what you've run into, and I can let you know if it's the same thing or if I've got different stuff that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where I keep wanting to use it, and I keep pushing on it to see how far I can take it. And there's a couple things that I've run into. One of them is just that to get it to work when you're scheduling things, your computer's got to be on, which it makes sense, but it can be kind of a source of friction because sometimes, like, if you're running it in the morning and you're a little bit late getting to your computer that day, like, it skips it. Now, if you go back in and look at it, it'll like pick it up and run it, but it's like there's a little less consistency there, which sure, I could turn my computer on 24/7, but for what I'm doing with it, it just feels a little like overkill, and it feels like there might be other better things. But I think the biggest source of friction I've seen, and again, like we've talked about this off and on, probably in a lot of the episodes that we've done so far, is like just around permissions. And like it seems like you'll give things permission, to go out on the web, grab things, or work on files. But then all of a sudden, a couple runs later, it runs into another issue where it just won't do it. And, it doesn't seem to fail loudly enough where it's like you necessarily notice, because at least for me, it's like background processes. It's just things that are happening that I want to happen, but they're not in my face enough for me to always notice. And so I've definitely just run into more issues with, permissions in general. And I've noticed too that Claude Code as well, permissions have kind of gone up, though I know that they're doing a lot of work with like auto mode that's just come out and stuff like that, where they're trying to address it, but it just feels like a bit of a messy time right now on that side of things. What have you been seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of that too. And I think for those that maybe didn't listen to our last episode, we talked a little bit about YOLO mode, or like what we call YOLO mode, but, and permissions and stuff. And in the context when we talked about it last time, it was about, I was talking about the productivity tool that I was using with Claude, primarily in the terminal. I mean, I do kind of integrate Claude Cowork with it a little bit, but I've pretty much seen the same thing that you were seeing. And kind of a funny story. So I set up Claude Cowork, I guess it's been at least a month ago, I guess now. I kind of when it came out, I set it up. I have, I don't know, like 6 or 7 scheduled jobs that I have run every day. And to your point, you have to have the laptop open. And so if you're using a laptop like, both of us do, and you don't have a Mac Mini or whatever running in the background, you're at the whims of when do you have that open for it to run. And that's one thing. But even when I have had it open, my experience within the last week has been, I kind of lost track of it. And I didn't realize, because mine, I have it set up so I get notifications, so I just know, okay, go check out that this job is done. For whatever reason, I hadn't seen any of those notifications. I didn't even check myself to go look. What I ended up finding is that I had, I think it shows like 5 or 6 of like the most recently run jobs.
Yeah.
So even if you have more that run, it's not going to show everything.
Yep.
But of those, every single one of them had a little blue dot or whatever next to it indicating that it was ready.
Yep.
And I opened each one, and I think of those 6, I think it was, I think all or 5 of the 6 at least was waiting on me to give it permissions.
Yep.
Like you just said. And some of them too, though, because I had, I think like 2 of them where I hadn't even looked at the output for like a week.
Yeah.
And so what I also noticed is that a couple of those, the last time they ran was like 3 days ago.
Sure.
So it wasn't even that they had run today and they were looking
Yeah.
for permissions. They had just seemingly stopped running. And I don't know if it's because they were looking for permissions.
Yeah.
I did notice when I like allowed a lot of it and, basically got caught up, it seems like it's kicked in and it's working
Sure.
again. But that was kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen that at all either, but
No.
yeah, the allowing permissions is kind of the interesting one, because it gets annoying when you have a scheduled job that you've already done multiple times and you
Yeah.
want it to just run, but then it sits there and it waits for you. And that's part of what caused my problem. But I cut you off there.
No. I think it actually speaks to kind of a bigger thing in my mind, like just in general, is like Cowork's cool. And like I use obviously Claude Code, I use Codex. The thing that I kind of struggle with is that they're all kind of separate. They all have different tabs. They've all got different projects. Like you've got so much spreading out now where like, especially, and I've heard that, OpenAI is now planning on combining Codex and Atlas and ChatGPT all into one app, kind of like Claude has done or Anthropic's done with Claude. So it just feels like, well, that's kind of cool because then you don't need 3 different products to do, the different things. There's like a UI layer that's missing. That's like, how does this all come together? Especially if you're running autonomous, processes. Where's the dashboard that actually like tells you everything you need to actually pay attention to? And like maybe that's something where, it feels like a missed opportunity from, these huge companies that this is their stuff, but it also like maybe there's an opportunity to tap into that in a different way. But it's just something I've noticed, to your point of like, when something's stuck, yes, you can look in the sidebar in Cowork if you think to go there to look for it, but how can that get surfaced in a more interesting way?
Yeah. And I mean, you're also making me think like neither one of us, again, has used Dispatch,
Yeah.
which is a layer on top of Cowork. And again, from my understanding, it's basically just a way to make it more like OpenClaw. You can
Yep.
talk to it when you're not at your desk or even at your house, whatever. Again, you have to have your computer running.
Yep.
So that's a limitation. But what it made me think about is like, if we were running Dispatch, even like, would that, even if you're sitting at the same, right in front of your computer, but you got
Yep.
Dispatch and it's like maybe pinging your phone.
Sure.
I don't know if that would be easier or like a better
Yeah.
way to handle it, or at least a way to just like keep on top of it. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that would be. I have to look at it because I had actually did set up Dispatch on my phone. So like I've got the app on my phone.
Okay.
And I don't
Yep.
see anything right now. And I don't know if like I'm just missing a syncing step in there or something, but at least just like out of the box after you set it up to work with your computer, it doesn't just do that automatically. So that might be something that's worth investigating for us to see, like, is there something there that can help us?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe that's something that would make sense for us to report back on next week is, why don't we just take some time, mess around with Dispatch, see if that helps with some of these issues, but at the same time, it's not gonna, that's not gonna be the solve for
No.
the, just allowing it to do things or whatever, so the permission stuff. So
Yeah.
one thing that, we talked about before we started recording as well is, what if we just dive in? Maybe our show and tell today is, let's actually go in and talk to Claude
Yeah.
live here I don't know if we're going to get to a resolution, but let's see what Claude can do to help us. Even if it's not in Cowork, I don't know if I sometimes wonder too. This is kind of a different thing. Like when I'm running Claude in different places, different harnesses or wherever,
Yep.
I will ask questions of Claude about Claude, and half the time it's like I don't know anything about that. Yeah, so I don't know if the models are updated to know enough about Cowork, but it's worth a shot. I'm kind of interested to see.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, while you're starting to spin that up, this actually touches on something that I found in a lot of the work I've been doing recently, where one of my favorite things about working with AI is that you can actually talk to your AI to figure out what it does know and what it doesn't know. Like I've many times with the product I'm building for work, it's like I'm trying to figure out, do you have access to the tools that I need you to? Like, what data are you seeing? You can actually ask it and it'll come back and talk to you about it and tell you what it knows, what it sees. And it's like having an interactive debugging partner essentially to truly like, because it's a challenge I've always faced is like there is a bit of a black box even when you're like putting tooling and a harness around the AI, like what is it actually seeing and what is it actually doing? And it's kind of fun just being able to interrogate the thing you're working with to see what it actually knows and see how it can help you get to the right spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's go back to the Cowork example, and I think let's just give it a shot and say, um, my Claude Cowork. I'm not going to say everything out loud, but my Claude Cowork is asking for permissions more than it seems like it should on scheduled jobs or something like that. Can you help me?
It's actually is an interesting thing that I'm seeing though, in that when I was in the desktop app and I was doing something similar to this, it actually didn't have permissions, I don't think, as a slash command.
Yeah. Well, I kind of was wondering about that too, because you seemed surprised by it, and I figured you would have tested it or checked it out too. Um, I've noticed that sometimes too. I don't know if it's because like I did just, although this is interesting, I did right before this. I just refreshed or relaunched my Claude desktop app.
Yeah.
So that's a fresh version. I don't know if that would interact with my Claude Code instance here or not. I would be surprised if it did, honestly. Um, let's see. It's prompted me for something. Use skill update config. Okay, look at that. So it's basically telling me you can use update config as a skill, and then it's got instructions basically for how to do it. And it's also asking me a permission. Do I want to proceed? I guess I'm trying to decide, like, if I say yes. Okay, so what it's basically saying is, do I want to update the permissions on update config without asking again? So here we go. It's asking me for permissions, but I'm not sure what it's going to do yet. So let's see. It's saying use this skill to configure the Claude Code harness via settings.json. So what I'm seeing here is that you can potentially set up in Claude Code something that would work for any harness, and that it would include Claude Desktop.
Yeah, because
Do you see
I
it
think
differently?
there's just one shared, because like in your directory, you've got the .claude folder, and
Yep.
under that there is the settings JSON. So I think, I mean, I haven't dug into it too much recently, but I think whatever you set there actually works for every different, essentially type of Claude that you can work with. Let me look at one of mine.
That it would make sense, I guess. For me, I haven't taken the time to dig into where or how Claude Desktop works. I know
Sure.
it's essentially a layer on it's a harness for Claude Code,
Yeah.
but I guess what I mean by how it works is I don't know that I've ever taken a look to see like what Claude Code is it using? Is it coming with its own version in like say a VM or something, or is it using, you know, uh,
I mean,
the same version that I've got on the desk or on my terminal? So
that's actually a
let's
good
see.
point because I've run into an issue before where back when I used to use the plugin in Windsurf for Claude Code, I would run into an issue where it wasn't working in that environment, but if I went to the terminal directly, it worked perfectly fine. And so I think there might be maybe not complete differences, but it does seem like they're using a little bit different versions depending on where you're at. And I'm sure when you're in the
Yep.
desktop app, it's again another environment because that one's running inside of the desktop app versus like in your terminal or in Windsurf. So yeah, there's definitely,
Right.
I think, some nuance there.
Yeah, for sure. And just coming back to what we're doing here in the terminal again, like I went ahead before and I said, well, I guess my prompt's gone, but it was basically saying, do I want to update the config settings? Basically, I said yes, allow it. Now, here's a good example of why it's good to read what Claude is telling you, or Codex, or anything, because I'm realizing now what it's trying to do is it's telling me the fix is straightforward. All you have to do is set default mode to bypass permissions, so that we will never, basically it's never going to ask for permissions again. And that's not what I want, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not going to say yes to this because I don't want it to say that, because I don't want to do that, because who knows what the heck it's going to do.
It's interesting though, because if you read what it's saying, it says for scheduled or automated agents, you need to
Right.
set default mode. But if I'm looking at the config, how like where it's editing, it doesn't look like there's any, agent specific setting there. It feels like it's just setting permissions globally to bypass as default.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say no. And, I think, again, I wasn't too concerned if we actually solved this, but I wanted to just show what it's like to dig in a little bit and talk to Claude about this stuff.
Yeah.
I am going to push back one time here, though, and what I'm going to do is, and this is something I like to do a lot, is if it has a specific thing that it says, I don't really want to type it out or whatever, but I will say, I'm just going to even copy the whole thing this time.
Sure.
And then ask it a question. Now, granted, that might already be in the context, but for me, I just sometimes like to be very explicit.
Yeah.
And I don't want to let it guess what I'm
Yep.
getting at. So anyways, I'm just going to say, okay, you told me, or actually I want to say, it appeared that you were going to basically give permissions at a global level. Based on the config file we saw. And I just want to question it and say, am I missing something, or did you, tell it to me wrong?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's helpful. I almost daily, probably several times a day, essentially have to ask questions like this, where it's like, are we understanding each other, or, is there something off? And I think it's a good gut check. It's like,
Yep.
you might be wrong, or we might be wrong in this case, but if you just assume that the AI knows what it's doing, you can get yourself burned pretty quickly.
Yep. And here we go. The answer it gives back is, you're right to catch that. Bypass permissions globally means no permissions prompts anywhere, interactive sessions too, and that is too broad. So the honest answer is, Claude doesn't have a way to set permissions only for scheduled jobs versus interactive sessions through settings.json. It's the same file for both. So that's interesting. It's now, I'm also wondering too, because I know that Claude, like if we just do /schedule, yeah, there's a scheduler in Claude Code here.
Yeah.
And I also wonder too if, like, I asked it about Cowork, but if it was thinking, hey, schedule jobs inside of me, Claude Code here, not Cowork. And that's something that, like, it could have been a bad prompt. I'm sure if I were to ask it, it would be like, oh no, you were fine.
It
wasn't you, it was me. But again, it's like, like right here, it's telling me that bypass permissions is the nuclear option. Fine for a personal command center where you trust everything, but it's because it's a global setting, we don't want to just do it for everything.
Yeah.
I think we don't have a whole lot more time to record here, so we're not going to get to a resolution anyways. But it does kind of make me want to keep digging into this and see if there is a way to figure out more granular, like, okay, I always want to accept the things that we were talking about. And, maybe that's something to just do a little more research and we can, report back on here. But I think I'm just going to leave this where it is. I'll just basically end the session.
I mean, I think it's a good experiment, and I think it feels like a whole, with them pushing more Cowork in Claude Code, it feels like there needs to be some separation of the config, and maybe there is.
Yep.
Like, it's definitely something that we should keep researching, because it just feels like there needs to be a way to do it. And I do know, I think the other way around this is that you can be a little more specific in general, where it's like, I'm cool with web searches. And I think there might even be a way to like whitelist what it can web search and stuff like that. So, I think that's the next iteration of this is, no, there's not a safe nuclear option, but what's the in between? And I think another thing we could try maybe next time, or we can at least report back on, is like doing an interactive session with Claude, because I know it can edit your settings.json.
Yep.
Like, so you can kind of talk about like, what do I actually do frequently? Where are the hangups? And, have it, because, the thing I've noticed is you have to know like all the different commands the right way. Like, it's not like, of course, we know what an ls is, but like sometimes you have to do like the ls star. Sometimes you want it to be more, fine tuned than that. And so you can talk to Claude and have it do the edits because it knows what it needs. And then you can kind of interactively find that kind of white list of what is like the sane bypass permissions that you want to put in place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like one of the examples I believe I brought up last time we recorded was, if I'm going to run a Python script, I'm probably okay with a specific script that it's going to run, but the command that Claude sees that it's going to allow, at least based on the way it would have done through the prompts we just saw there, is it's going to include all the parameters that make it unique.
Yep.
Especially if it's, say, like an API call that's calling if the API call to, like, let's just say we want to go to google.com for some API call, and then the next time we want to go to facebook.com or whatever it is, but you're basically calling the same script every time, and it's only the difference of Google and facebook.com that make Claude think it's a new thing that it like will continually ask for. That's the sort of thing that I was getting at last time. And so I think some way to whitelist, and maybe it's the same kind of thing that ls star was showing. It's like,
I think it probably is, but you don't want to do Python star, because then
it can't just be Python. It's got to be your script.
So it can't, and that's kind of what I'm saying, is like finding that in between, because you don't want it to ask for permission for all of the different parameters, but you don't want to give it permission to do any Python execution, because then you're opening yourself up for all sorts of problems. And so I think the interactive way of doing it could be an interesting way to just like, and some of it too is, I'd be curious to see, and again, this can be a follow-up, is like, can Claude look into your like command history even? Because like you can, on the terminal, look at what commands you run, and can it even look through there and be like, okay, this is what you do run, and see, and use that as like a baseline. And it's always, how can you use AI to make the boring but important stuff easier? Because if you have to do it all by hand, you're less likely to do it. You're either going to go with the bypass all permissions, or you're going to be hitting accept all the time. And so like, where's the best way that you can do a more robust version of it without having to just like go through and do it all manually?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't have a whole lot else to add to that. But so we can leave it there, but I think there's definitely things to check out and report back on. Like we said, we'll look into dispatch. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of if that at least improves some of the scheduling workflow stuff that we talked about with Cowork. So, well, on that note, feel free to check us out with our newsletter. That's live. We get, probably by the time this is live, we'll have a couple issues out. Feel free to like and subscribe down below. And looking forward to the next one. See ya.